friendship appeared unshakable, a bond forged over years, built on trust, laughter, and shared dreams. They had grown up together, weathered the turbulence of teenage years, and stood by each other in moments of triumph and despair. To anyone on the outside, they seemed inseparable, the kind of friends who could finish each other's sentences and shared memories that would last a lifetime. But beneath the surface, something far darker festered, a chilling secret that would soon unravel everything. It began with the disappearance of a young woman. Her car was found abandoned on a bridge, keys still in the ignition, as though she had vanished into thin air. Family and friends were devastated, organizing searches, calling for help, but nothing came of it. The authorities leaned toward a tragic accident, a young life possibly lost to a desperate decision. Slowly, the horrifying truth emerged. The disappearance wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a suicide. When the police were able to obtain one secret conversation, the chilling details left them deeply shocked. 19-year-old Sarah Stern was a vibrant and ambitious young woman with a passion for creativity. She had a love for art, but it wasn't her only passion. Sarah was also an accomplished athlete, having been a key player on her school's softball team and an active member of the swim team. The decision between focusing on sports or pursuing her love for art was a tough one. Ultimately, Sarah chose to follow her heart and enrolled in a college program focused on art and TV production. Her artistic talents were well known in her community. She regularly attended film and arts festivals, showcasing her work, and she took every opportunity to bring her creativity to life, including painting seasonal designs on the windows of local schools during the holidays. Whether it was photography, painting, or anything involving creativity, Sarah was eager to get involved. Sarah often referred to herself as a reckless optimist, a phrase that captured her spirit perfectly. She threw herself into new ventures with enthusiasm and never shied away from challenges, always maintaining a positive outlook even when things didn't go as planned. Her friends frequently remarked on her contagious optimism, and her upbeat nature made her a beloved figure in the small town of Neptune City, New Jersey. Sarah lived with her father, Michael Stern, and her grandmother in their family home. She was an only child, and the loss of her mother, Carla, who had passed away from cancer a few years earlier, had left a deep emotional mark on her. Carla had been the owner of a local bookstore for 25 years, and her love of literature and travel had greatly influenced Sarah. These experiences fueled Sarah's imagination and creativity, and in many ways, Sarah's artistic ambitions were a tribute to her mother's memory. Michael and Sarah shared a close bond, one that had only deepened after Carla's passing. The two relied on each other for comfort and support, creating a strong family unit. Despite the grief that lingered from losing Carla, Sarah and her father had formed a partnership that helped them navigate life's challenges together. In the early hours of December 3, 2016, at around 2:46 a.m., the Neptune Township Police Department received a call to check out a suspicious vehicle on the Belmar Bridge along Route 35. When officers arrived at the scene, they found an abandoned car, a 1994 Oldsmobile 88, parked on the side of the bridge. The car wasn't damaged, and there was no sign of a break-in. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. It was an unsettling discovery. After running the license plate, the police learned that the car belonged to Sarah's grandmother, Lillian Stern. However, the car's primary driver was none other than Sarah herself. Many of the officers recognized the name immediately, as Sarah's family was well known in the tight-knit Neptune City community. The sight of her car abandoned in such a strange manner sent immediate alarm bells ringing. The position of the car, right by the water, caused a gnawing fear that someone, perhaps Sarah, might have jumped into the Shark River below. A dive team was quickly dispatched to search the freezing, fast-moving waters, but darkness made the search almost impossible. They would have to wait for daylight to continue. However, with the strong currents of the Shark River flowing toward the Atlantic Ocean, the fear was that if someone had indeed gone into the water, they would be swept away quickly. As the search for Sarah intensified, police contacted her father, Michael, who was in Florida on business. He hadn't heard from Sarah all day, though he had tried calling her the night before to say goodnight. Worried sick, Michael began the long 17-hour drive back to New Jersey, his mind racing with possibilities. As the investigation continued, police towed Sarah's car and made their way to her home just before 3:30 a.m. Something was off as soon as they arrived. The house lights were all on, and the back door was unlocked. Inside, the home was eerily quiet. Sarah wasn't there, nor was there any sign of her having been home recently. Sarah's grandmother, who lived there too, was staying with a friend due to feeling unwell. So Sarah had been alone in the house with only her beloved dog, Buddy. But when officers searched the house, they found Buddy locked in his cage. A highly unusual situation. According to her friends and neighbors, Sarah almost never confined Buddy, and wherever she went, Buddy usually followed. The fact that he was caged and left alone with no food or water only deepened the mystery. Something wasn't right. Police spoke with the Stearns' neighbor, Robin, who said that earlier in the day, Sarah had stopped by her house with her best friend, Liam, to drop off a box of items that had belonged to her late mother. According to Robin, Sarah had been organizing her mother's belongings for a while, delivering boxes to various friends and family members. The reason for this was unclear, but it seemed to be part of something Sarah had been preoccupied with for some time. When Robin later tried to text Sarah to check in, she received no reply, a silence that felt increasingly ominous given the circumstances. As details continued to emerge, the question remained: what had happened to Sarah Stern? The officers gave Buddy some treats, ensuring he was safe and comfortable, while Michael, Sarah's father, continued his long drive back from Florida. They updated the station with their findings, and it was clear that the search for Sarah Stern had begun in earnest. The discovery of her abandoned car, especially in the strange circumstances, keys left inside, doors unlocked, and the car parked right above a river, raised unsettling questions. The obvious concern was that Sarah might have jumped, but her father immediately rejected that idea. Despite having gone through some difficult years, Sarah was in a great place mentally and emotionally. She had an infectious optimism, was brimming with excitement about her future, and was ready to take on new adventures. It seemed unthinkable that she would vanish without a trace, much less take her own life. In fact, Sarah had been busy planning for the future. Her to-do list was full of exciting opportunities and projects. A local restaurant, Bruno's Pizza and Sub Shop, had approached her about painting a Christmas-themed mural on its windows, a project she was eagerly looking forward to completing. She had also bought tickets to see a Broadway show in New York City and had signed up for bartending school, which would allow her to support herself financially while dedicating her days to her true passion: art. Sarah's long-term plan involved moving to Canada, where she would live with family. She had already made several trips there and felt a deep connection to the country, envisioning it as the perfect place to build her life and career. She was even preparing for the move, having purchased a TV as a Christmas gift for her grandmother and ordered a hovercraft, which she planned to use once she settled in Canada. Sarah was a dreamer and a doer, someone who was taking active steps toward realizing the life she wanted. In the short term, Sarah was scheduled to have dinner with a friend the following day and had several ongoing art projects that required her attention. Disappearing without warning simply didn't fit the picture of who she was or how she lived her life. She had a network of supportive friends, big plans for the future, and seemed to be in a positive and productive place emotionally. So, where could she have gone? One of the last known people to see Sarah was her longtime friend, 19-year-old Liam McAtasney. Liam wasn't just any friend. He had known Sarah since they were 6 years old, having met at Sunday school. They remained incredibly close throughout the years, even discussing the possibility of moving to Canada together. When Michael Stern learned his daughter was missing, one of the first people he suggested the police contact was Liam, along with his mother, Megan. Sarah and Liam spent a lot of time together, and if anyone knew where Sarah might be, it would likely be Liam. When officers knocked on Megan McAtasney's door early that morning, she wasn't too concerned at first. She assured the officers that she could reach Sarah easily, saying, "I'll call her, she'll answer for me." But when Megan tried, the call went straight to voicemail, and her text messages, normally sent as blue iMessages, were being delivered as green. indicating Sarah's phone was either off or out of service. A growing sense of unease settled in. Megan directed the police to Liam's apartment, which was only a short distance away. Liam lived with another close friend of Sarah's, 19-year-old Preston Taylor. Preston had been a major part of Sarah's life as well. He had even taken her to their junior prom. Together, Sarah, Liam, and Preston were inseparable. They called themselves the Squad, and everyone in their community knew the three of them as best friends. Despite occasional teasing from others about possible romantic relationships within the group, their friendship remained strictly platonic. In fact, in Sarah's high school yearbook, Liam and Preston appeared in the best friends section, and on Liam's Facebook page, Sarah was listed in his family section. Their bond was as close as family, and their friendship was a constant in Sarah's life. By 4 a.m., just a few hours after the discovery of Sarah's car, detectives arrived at Liam's apartment. Liam was cooperative and told them that he had seen Sarah the previous day. He explained that they had spent some time together, but that he hadn't heard from her recently. According to Liam, he had lost his phone, gone to work, and then went straight to bed. He said that earlier in the day he had been at Sarah's house, helping her organize some of her belongings. In fact, there were 3 crates of her mother's possessions in his apartment at that very moment. The two had driven around town for a bit, stopping at Taco Bell for lunch at around 2:30 p.m. After that, Liam said he had to leave for work at 4 p.m., and that was the last time he saw her. Liam also revealed an intriguing detail. Sarah had recently told him about a discovery she made after her mother passed away. In a shoebox hidden in their family's second home, Sarah had found thousands of dollars in cash. The money was old, some of it stuck together, and much of it in poor condition. According to Sarah, the cash had come with a note, explaining that it was her inheritance. She had confided in Liam that if she could find a way to deposit the money or get it accepted by a bank, it could be a game changer for her future, perhaps even enough to help her finance her dreams of becoming a professional artist. The conversation about the hidden cash added another layer of mystery to Sarah's disappearance. Was the money connected in some way? And more importantly, where was Sarah? The next steps of the investigation would be crucial in unraveling the truth behind Sarah Stern's disappearance, a case that was growing more complex with every new piece of information. Sarah's aunt corroborated the story about the money, stating that Sarah had been keeping part of the cash in a fireproof box in her bedroom and the rest safely deposited in a bank's safety deposit box. While the money gave Sarah a sense of security, it also caused some unease within her family. Her aunt had been especially concerned when Sarah mentioned that she had told Liam about the inheritance. They had previously agreed to keep it a secret, especially given the large sum involved. Sarah's aunt warned her that making it known could attract unwanted attention, but Sarah had brushed off the concerns. Liam, after all, was her closest friend. He was someone she trusted implicitly, someone who had been by her side through thick and thin, and naturally, he knew everything about her life. When detectives asked Liam if he had any idea why Sarah might have wanted to disappear, he offered a starkly different perspective from what her father had shared. While Michael described his daughter as optimistic and full of plans for the future, Liam portrayed a more troubled picture. He mentioned that Sarah had struggled deeply in the past, even attempting to take her own life after a series of arguments with her father and the death of her mother. According to Liam, these emotional scars still lingered, and though she seemed outwardly happy to others, he believed she had never truly recovered from those dark times. Michael was shocked and hurt when he heard what Liam had said. He had never known his daughter to hold such deep-seated despair, and the idea of them having such severe arguments puzzled him. Sure, there had been difficult moments. What family didn't have those? But nothing close to the point where it could drive Sarah to such extremes. In fact, their relationship had improved immensely after her mother passed. They communicated frequently, texting almost daily, sharing everything from mundane details to their hopes and dreams. The only day they hadn't spoken was the day she disappeared, and it was the only time Michael had ever noticed her iPhone messages coming through as green, indicating that something was amiss with her phone. To everyone who knew her, Sarah's disappearance was completely out of character. She had never vanished without telling someone where she was going, never left Buddy, her beloved dog, unattended, and had always been reachable. The police, however, began to wonder whether Liam knew more than he was letting on. Was he covering for Sarah? Perhaps helping her run away? After all, he was her confidant, the one she would have turned to if she needed help. Detectives had no reason to suspect foul play at this point, but they couldn't ignore the possibility that Liam was keeping some vital information to himself. CCTV footage from the area confirmed parts of Liam's story. It showed that he and Sarah had indeed been at Taco Bell for lunch, as he had said. There was also footage from a neighbor's security camera that captured the two coming and going from Sarah's house throughout the day. Later, the camera recorded Liam driving away to work in the late afternoon, corroborating his alibi. However, another critical piece of evidence emerged that evening. Security footage showed Sarah's car leaving her driveway at around 11:45 p.m., hours after Liam claimed he had last seen her. The footage didn't make it clear whether it was Sarah behind the wheel, but it raised significant questions about the timeline of events. If Liam had left for work at 4 p.m. and worked his shift until midnight, as he initially said, then how could he explain his sudden departure at 10 p.m., well before the end of his shift? This discrepancy left a crucial gap in his story. By all accounts, Liam was the last person to see Sarah that day. So, on the afternoon of December 3, detectives returned to speak with him again, hoping he might remember something new. His story remained the same. He and Sarah had lunch, spent some time together, and then he went to work, leaving her at her house. But as he repeated his account, he emphasized that Sarah wasn't in a good headspace, hinting again that she may have wanted to leave New Jersey. He pointed out that, unlike others, he had a unique insight into her emotional state due to the special bond they shared. Liam was cooperative and willing to assist the investigation, even volunteering to sit down for a recorded interview. During the conversation, he spoke at length about Sarah's mental health struggles, focusing on the alleged arguments between her and her father. He painted a picture of a young woman who was more fragile than her friends and family realized. However, before the detectives could delve deeper into his claims, they were informed that Liam's parents had contacted a lawyer on his behalf. The lawyer quickly advised Liam to stop speaking to the police, and the interview was abruptly cut short. Another detail soon came to light that complicated matters further. Footage from Sarah's bank showed her withdrawing $7,000 from her safety deposit box on the day she vanished. She had approximately $23,000 stored there, and it was significant that she had taken out a substantial sum of cash. Notably, Liam had been with her at the time of the withdrawal, yet he had conveniently failed to mention this part of their day when recounting the events to the police. Why only bring up Taco Bell? He had already admitted that Sarah had come into a large inheritance. So why omit this key detail? The pieces of the puzzle weren't quite fitting together. Sarah's car leaving the driveway at 11:45 p.m., combined with Liam clocking out of work 2 hours earlier than his shift ended, left detectives with more questions than answers. While Liam maintained his innocence, the growing inconsistencies in his story cast a shadow of doubt over his role in Sarah's disappearance. Was he hiding something more sinister? Or was he simply a young man caught in a web of confusion and fear as his best friend vanished into thin air? The investigation would need to dig deeper into these relationships and the mysterious circumstances surrounding that fateful night. The next person detectives needed to speak with was Preston Taylor, Liam's roommate and another of Sarah's close friends. Preston was far less forthcoming than Liam had been, offering little in the way of new information. Still, he confirmed Liam's version of events, saying that what Liam had told him was consistent with what he told the officers. When asked what he thought had happened to Sarah, Preston grew emotional. Through tears, he admitted that he believed Sarah might have jumped off the bridge. He cited a list of reasons: her strained relationship with her father, her struggles with grief, and the possibility of depression, as factors that could have driven her to take such a drastic step. As the detectives left the room, they exchanged knowing glances. Something wasn't sitting right. They felt strongly that both Preston and Liam were withholding critical information. The pieces of the puzzle didn't add up. The police were increasingly confident that Sarah hadn't jumped off that bridge. Why would she have run away, leaving behind all of her possessions, including the inheritance money she had recently withdrawn? Everyone knew about her plans to move to Canada. There was no need for secrecy and certainly no reason to vanish without a trace. A full week had passed since Sarah Stern, the 19-year-old from Neptune, New Jersey, had last been seen. In the absence of answers, Sarah's family and friends decided to take matters into their own hands. They organized a search party, determined to leave no stone unturned in their effort to find her. Liam, his twin brothers Seamus and Preston joined nearly 200 volunteers, all of them braving the freezing temperatures to scour the area. For nearly 12 hours each day, they combed through woods, fields, and riverbanks. Despite the risk posed by the bitter cold, no one was deterred. Sarah's loved ones couldn't afford to waste any time as hope dwindled with each passing day. Professional search teams had already been hard at work. Divers had spent days searching the nearby river where her car had been found, but they turned up nothing. Helicopters had scanned the area from above, but they too came up empty. With no physical evidence to guide them, Sarah's family feared the worst. The New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Unit and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had also joined the search efforts. But despite the combined manpower, no trace of Sarah had been discovered. Just when it seemed that the case might go cold, a break came, one that would blow the investigation wide open. Anthony Curry, a former high school classmate of Sarah, Liam, and Preston, came forward with unsettling information. Anthony, an aspiring filmmaker, frequently discussed movie ideas with Liam, who was a huge horror movie enthusiast. They had shared countless conversations about films and plot lines, especially twisted horror scenarios, but one conversation in particular had started to trouble Anthony. A few days before Sarah had been reported missing, Liam had casually mentioned a plot idea to Anthony. He described a scenario in which a man murders a woman by strangling her, intending to steal a large sum of money she had recently acquired. After killing her, the man and his friends would dispose of the body by throwing it off a bridge, making it look like she had jumped. The group would then bury the money in a park, planning to return for it later and become rich. At the time, Anthony hadn't thought much of it. He and Liam often brainstormed bizarre, gruesome ideas for horror films, and Liam's enthusiasm for dark plotlines was nothing new. He had seemed excited about the idea, grinning and bouncing around like a kid with a new toy. However, since Sarah's disappearance, something about that conversation had started to gnaw at Anthony. Liam had been contacting him every single day on Snapchat, asking him repeatedly if the police had spoken to him and whether his name had come up in the investigation. The more Anthony thought about it, the more alarmed he became. Why was Liam so concerned about the police? If he had nothing to do with Sarah's disappearance, why would he be so anxious to know what the detectives were asking? Anthony's suspicions grew when he recalled the details of Liam's plot idea. The method of the murder, strangulation, the money, and throwing the body off a bridge suddenly felt eerily similar to Sarah's real-life circumstances. Her car had been found near a bridge, and although no body had been discovered, it didn't seem like a coincidence anymore. Then there was the fact that Sarah had recently come into a significant sum of money. Anthony remembered one specific detail that Liam had mentioned in their conversation. The money was old and in poor condition, just like the cash Sarah had inherited. What truly raised the red flags for Anthony was the fact that Liam insisted on communicating via Snapchat, a platform designed to delete messages automatically after they had been viewed. It seemed like Liam was trying to avoid leaving any digital trace of their conversations. Fortunately, Anthony had been suspicious enough to take photos of some of the messages with another phone before they disappeared. In one of those messages, Liam mentioned low-quality, old money, a detail that aligned perfectly with what police already knew about Sarah's inheritance. This was a significant development, and it became clear that Liam was trying to hint at something deeper, or maybe even confess in a roundabout way. The detectives were eager to pursue this lead. They asked Anthony to maintain contact with Liam, encouraging him to keep the conversations going and see if Liam might slip up or reveal more about his involvement. The hope was that, given enough time and pressure, Liam might admit to something small, something that would help police break the case open. With this new information in hand, the investigation was shifting from a missing persons case to something far more sinister, a possible murder involving people Sarah had once trusted completely. Anthony Curry agreed to help the police, knowing the gravity of what was at stake. The detectives set him up with a discreet microphone and a tiny camera hidden in his car. And on the night of January 31, at precisely 11 p.m., Liam got into Anthony's car. Liam's paranoia was evident from the start. He immediately asked Anthony to check if he was wearing a wire. Anthony, trying to remain calm and casual, let Liam inspect him. Once satisfied, Liam began to speak, and what followed left everyone, especially the detectives listening in, completely stunned. What Liam revealed wasn't a small slip-up or an accidental confession. It was a detailed, cold-blooded admission to murder, a crime meticulously planned for months with one clear motive: money. Sarah's inheritance was the prize, and Liam had gone to shocking lengths to get his hands on it. With chilling indifference, Liam described the events of that fateful day. "I pretty much hung her," he began, explaining that he had strangled Sarah in her own home. He recounted the moment with disturbing detail, recalling how he lifted her off the ground, her feet dangling in the air. "She just pissed herself and said my name, and then that was it," he continued, revealing that he had expected her to die quickly, but it wasn't as simple as he thought. "I thought I was gonna be able to choke her out in like a couple minutes, but she just lay there having a seizure or something." Liam then described how he stuffed a shirt down Sarah's throat, covering her nose to ensure she wouldn't vomit or breathe, and even set a timer to make sure she would die. As if his recounting of the murder wasn't chilling enough, Liam casually mentioned how Sarah's dog, Buddy, was present during the entire crime. "Buddy just watched," he remarked, seemingly amused by the fact that the dog posed no threat to his plan. Realizing he needed help with disposing of the body, Liam reached out to Preston Taylor, his close friend and roommate who was already in on the plan. Preston had agreed to help Liam for a share of Sarah's inheritance, $3,000 to be exact. Together, they orchestrated the disposal of Sarah's body with cold precision. Liam explained how, after killing Sarah, he had dragged her body into a back room before heading off to work, leaving Preston to move the body. Once Liam finished his shift, the two of them transported Sarah's lifeless body in her own car. Liam described how they had carefully positioned her in the passenger seat, making it look as though she were merely sleeping. They drove to the bridge where they planned to dispose of her body. Throughout the recounting, Liam's demeanor was shockingly arrogant. He smirked often and seemed proud of how well his plan had played out, at least up until that point. He bragged about how he had prepared for the police investigation, detailing how he had crafted a story that would make him appear innocent. "I had planned the situation for me to be interrogated by cops. That was part of my plan, to make me look not guilty," he said, his confidence evident. The only hitch in his plan, as he saw it, was that Sarah's body had never surfaced. "We threw her off the bridge, and the body never showed up," he complained. "It's probably frozen. It's probably all the way out in the ocean." Despite the gravity of what he was saying, Liam showed no remorse for his actions. Instead, he seemed more concerned about the money, which had disappointed him. Some of the bills from Sarah's inheritance were damaged, and this fact irritated him deeply. For him, Sarah's life had been worth nothing more than a pile of old, low-quality cash. Anthony sat in the driver's seat, barely able to contain his shock and revulsion. It took every ounce of his willpower to remain calm and continue listening as Liam casually described the brutal murder of someone who had once been one of his closest friends. Liam went on to describe how he and Preston had struggled with the weight of Sarah's body when they attempted to throw it off the bridge. He complained that, despite her petite frame, moving her body had been physically difficult. "She's not even that big of a girl," he remarked, but it had still been a struggle to lift her over the railing. In the process, Liam had even injured his leg, which he found more bothersome than the crime itself. On February 1, 2017, both Liam and Preston were arrested, charged with the murder of Sarah Stern. To the public, it was a shocking betrayal. Sarah's supposed best friends were now implicated in the grisly plot to kill her for money. The close-knit group that everyone had seen as inseparable was now shattered by the unimaginable truth. Once in custody, Preston Taylor wasted little time confessing. He corroborated much of what Liam had already told Anthony, revealing more details of the crime. According to Preston, Sarah had been talking about moving to Canada, and Liam had used that dream to manipulate her into taking money from her inheritance. Liam convinced Sarah that the cash was necessary to help them finalize their plans, but in reality, he had no intention of ever following through. It was all a ruse to gain access to the money and take her life. On December 2, the day of the murder, Liam and Sarah had gone to the bank together, where Sarah withdrew approximately $7,000 from her account. Afterward, they returned to her home, at which point Liam brutally murdered her in the house where she had grown up. Preston confessed to helping Liam hide the evidence and dispose of Sarah's body. He led authorities to 2 safes buried in a nearby park, one containing some of Sarah's inheritance and the other containing her clothes. When Liam was arrested, he still had the key to one of the safes on him, a final piece of damning evidence. Preston even walked detectives through Sarah's house, describing what he had seen when he arrived after the murder and explaining what had happened at the bridge. It was the final confirmation the authorities needed to piece together the tragic fate of Sarah Stern, betrayed by the people she had trusted most. Liam McAtasney, astonishingly, pleaded not guilty to all charges, while his co-conspirator, Preston Taylor, realized the gravity of what he was facing. Liam seemed unfazed by the mountain of evidence against him. Preston, fully aware of the consequences, chose a different path. In April 2017, Preston Taylor, who had once been Sarah Stern's close friend and confidant, came clean. He confessed to the horrific series of events that had unfolded and the part he had played in the murder. On that day, standing in the courtroom, Preston admitted his guilt on multiple counts, including first-degree robbery, second-degree conspiracy to commit robbery, and second-degree desecrating or disturbing human remains. Preston's decision to testify against Liam marked a turning point in the case. His cooperation with the prosecution was critical, and in exchange, he hoped for some leniency in sentencing. Nearly 2 years after Sarah Stern had vanished, the trial of Liam McAtasney began. Monmouth County prosecutors faced an uphill battle. Their office had only ever tried one case before without a body. The lack of physical remains introduced an element of uncertainty, and there was a nervous energy as the trial commenced. Liam had already fired his initial lawyer, opting for a new defense team that sought to prevent his taped confession from being admitted as evidence. His defense hinged on a far-fetched claim that the confession he made to Anthony Curry was merely a twisted audition for a potential role in one of Anthony's films. According to Liam, the entire story was fabricated, a poorly executed attempt to impress his friend. The recording, in which Liam detailed the cold-blooded murder of Sarah Stern, left little room for doubt. His graphic recounting of the crime, combined with Preston's testimony, painted a chilling picture of the brutal betrayal that had occurred. Preston's testimony was especially damning. He detailed the calculated nature of the murder plot, stating, "Strangling was decided because any other way, any type of weapon would have been too messy, left too much evidence. And then, as far as what to do with her after she was dead, yeah, we talked about a couple of plans. Burying her down at the campsite that man's dad owns, just leaving her at the house. And then, ultimately, we decided that the best way to go about it would be to make it look like a suicide." Without Anthony Curry's bravery in securing Liam's confession, it's likely the truth would have never come to light. Would Liam have ever confided in anyone else? Would Preston have cracked under pressure? Authorities believe it was unlikely. Liam had been meticulous in his planning, from crafting alibis to participating in search efforts, and Preston had been complicit every step of the way. It was a betrayal so deep and calculated that the police feared Sarah's murder would have gone unsolved indefinitely without Anthony's involvement. When the verdict was finally read, Liam began to cry. Tears that the prosecution argued were nothing more than a calculated attempt to gain sympathy. Liam McAtasney was found guilty of 7 counts, including first-degree murder, felony murder, and robbery. The court handed down the maximum sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preston Taylor, for his part, received an 18-year prison sentence after pleading guilty and cooperating with the prosecution. He will be eligible for parole in 2032. Despite the exhaustive searches for Sarah Stern, her remains have never been recovered. Experts believe her body was likely thrown into the ocean within an hour of being thrown off the bridge, making it nearly impossible to find her. The story began with a woman whose disappearance caused widespread anxiety and fear. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation became more and more complex, seemingly impossible to solve, and clues were lost in obscurity. After a long time, the gruesome discovery of the victim's body, along with fragments of her costume scattered in different places, horrified the police. The forensic examination painted a dark and chilling picture, confirming the brutality of the crime. The body showed signs of extreme violence. The face and jaw were broken beyond recognition. The story of the victim's last moments was analyzed, revealing the depth of the criminal's cruelty. This complex case, woven from threads of violence, deceit, and, ultimately, left an indelible mark on the community and the hearts of those who walked his painful path to justice. In the small town of Monroe, the largest city and the county seat of Monroe County, Michigan, USA, population 21,000, where life was peaceful and quiet, the silence was shattered by the horrific news that the remains of a young girl had been found in the woods. Amid the fog and darkness, Chelsea Bruck, whose disappearance at a Halloween party had shocked the entire area, was found dead. The poison ivy costume she had worn that fateful night became an ominous symbol of her harsh fate. The police officers faced a complex and frightening case. Every trace found, every new testimony, pointed to the cruelty and cold calculation of the criminal. False testimony, deceit, and contradictory evidence entangled the investigation like a web in which more and more people were caught. At the heart of these events was Daniel Clay, whose name surfaced among the shadows of the past. His arrest should have put an end to the case, but instead opened a new chapter of the nightmare. Conflicting testimony, brutal details, and unclear motives turned the investigation into a nightmarish maze from which there seemed to be no way out. Monroe, a town where everyone knew each other, now lived in fear. Who could have committed such an atrocity? Which neighbor, acquaintance, or friend was the monster in disguise? On the 22nd of July, 2016, the police arrived at Daniel's house. The man tried to escape but was caught by police. He was arrested and brought in for questioning. Daniel thought it had to do with child support, but detectives immediately started asking him about his involvement in Chelsea's murder at the Halloween party. He admitted he was there but quickly left. However, the guy refused to admit he had any connection to Chelsea and even claimed it was the first time he had ever seen her. The police didn't believe him, of course, because Chelsea's posters were on every corner, and Daniel couldn't have been unaware of her disappearance. At the same time, he could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of the murdered woman. To get information, investigators began using increasingly sophisticated techniques, such as playing good cop, bad cop. Then the man's stories began to diverge. He admitted that he had overlooked it. He had been in a casual, consensual relationship with an unknown woman at the meeting. He hadn't gotten a good look at her, but he claimed she was wearing some kind of suit. The man claimed he helped Chelsea into the car with her, and shortly after their brief kiss, they parted ways. The suspect's mistake was that he thought it was about male fluids. However, the police found not her, but his skin cells on her body. Now that we know who the suspected culprit is, let's find out who Chelsea Bruck is and why her outfit turned out to be deadly for her. Chelsea Bruck was born in 1992 in Trenton, a city in Wayne County, Michigan, United States, with a population of 25,000. Her mother's name was Leanda, and her father's name was Matthew. The father was a farmer, and his wife worked in a bank. In a family of 5 children, Chelsea was the youngest. She had 3 sisters, Jennifer, Megan, and Cassandra, and a brother, Nathaniel. The closest she was to Cassandra, probably because of the age difference, as the girl was only 2 years older. However, all the children were very close to each other and their parents. The Bruck family could be called the standard of an American family. They all moved and settled in a small village called Maybe in Monroe County in the U.S. state of Michigan with a population of about 600 people. In such small villages, as a rule, everyone knows each other and the crime rate is extremely low. Chelsea grew up in a friendly atmosphere, was religious, and was brought up with high moral values. The family lived on a huge farm of 65 hectares, which was founded back in 1875 by the great-grandfather of the head of the family. He continued the family business, farming for the fourth generation in a row. Chelsea attended a Christian school, devoting her free time to the study of Catholic scriptures. She then moved on to Monroe High School, which emphasized athletic training, cheerleading, and football. After receiving her education, Chelsea continued to live on a farm with her parents and Cassandra. During this period, her older sisters married and moved away. The girl loved to cook and planned to attend a culinary college to become a chef. To get the necessary skills, she got a job near her home in a restaurant called Olga's Kitchen. Here, she fulfilled the role of administrator and was very happy with her position. Chelsea grew up to be a pleasant, sociable, and beautiful girl and was always closely connected with her parents. She didn't even have a license to drive a car and wasn't particularly interested in the matter. Any transport tasks were happily handled by her parents. When she turned 22, she had already worked for 4 years and had made a circle of good friends with whom she was in constant contact. Chelsea was a very nice person who did not deserve the cruel fate that awaited her. She liked to express herself at Halloween parties. She could dye her hair pink or other bright colors, and she also had a small tattoo behind her ear in the form of an anchor. The girl loved to attend parties. One of her favorite events, in which she regularly participated, was a rock concert of local musician Mike, which he arranged on the territory of his farm. Within a few years, the ordinary Little Rock Party had grown into a well-known event, attracting about 1,000 people, even from neighboring states. The organizer had his own band and invited other local performers. On October 25, 2014, a long-awaited Halloween concert and costume party was to take place in Newport, Michigan, a half-hour drive from the Bruck farm. Chelsea was going to go with her friends Becky and Laura because she couldn't miss such a big event. She made herself a weird outfit and dressed up as Poison Ivy from the Batman universe because there was a costume contest at the event and she was going to win it. She spent a long time making this costume, selecting details, and as a basis, she took a swimming costume. The work on the outfit took many nights, but the result was worth it. The girl made a costume worthy of first place and looked very original in her outfit. On Saturday, October 25, 2014, the girlfriends gathered for a party. Laura was driving. After the event, the girls were not going to go straight home, and 22-year-old Chelsea planned to spend the night at her place. She packed up all her things and headed out to have fun. Around 10 p.m., they arrived at the concert. However, it was too early as the event had not yet started and preparations were still underway. Despite this, there were already hundreds of guests at the event who were expecting a large-scale party. Everything was thoroughly organized. Several vans with food and drinks, security guards watching the order on the site, and parking. It seemed to be absolutely safe. Therefore, the girls, who regularly attended this event, could not imagine that this time the whole celebration would turn out to be a nightmare. Leaving the car, the girlfriends headed to the concert venue. Chelsea had no pockets on her costume, so she was forced to leave her mobile phone in the car to avoid losing it. Over 1,000 people gathered at the event, and almost everyone was in different stage looks and costumes. Alcohol was pouring down by the river, of course. Of course, such concerts do not do without illegal substances, so many were tipsy. Most of the people were unknown to the girls because they came from different cities, but there were a few acquaintances: Penny, her sister Heather, and Becky. They all knew each other well and had been socializing for years, even though Penny was 10 years older than Chelsea and already had children of her own. Here, they all felt the energy of the event and enjoyed the festivities. Finally, the rock concert began, and everyone was enthralled by the loud music. About an hour after the concert started, the girls headed to a big bonfire that was lit away from the concert camp. It was about 12:50 at night. Halfway there, Chelsea suddenly shrieked and cried. She was holding her face, which had a large gash on it. Out of the darkness, someone had attacked her, and the girl had received a sudden blow to the forehead and bridge of her nose from a drunken camper. Penny began to calm her friend down and persuade her to stay and not go home alone. She couldn't drive Chelsea home since she didn't have her own car and depended on her sister, who didn't seem to have any intention of leaving the event. Chelsea's friends continued to party even though Chelsea was traumatized and withdrew to the bathroom. After a while, Chelsea's friends began to disperse without waiting for her. Becky went home alone. She had Chelsea's things with her that she was going to give to her the next day. Penny and Heather left too, since Penny had to get up early and get ready for work. They never found Chelsea. Penny couldn't call her since Chelsea's cell phone was left in the car. She knew Laura would give her a ride, and with peace of mind, she headed home with her friends. But what she didn't know was that Chelsea and Laura weren't together at that moment either. They were lost in the crowd at the party, since there were so many people and everyone was acting fussy. Laura tried to find her friend, but to no avail. Becky and Laura weren't particularly worried about her, as there were a lot of people they knew there. The girls thought that Chelsea was spending time with one of her own and would be driven home. The situation was complicated by the fact that all the girls were drunk and disoriented by the noise and chaos of the party, so they couldn't supervise their friend. Becky woke up early in the morning. She knew that none of her friends had made plans for that Sunday. They all knew they might be hungover and were going to sleep it off. The girl dialed Chelsea's mother's number to tell her that she had her friend's belongings left. However, there was no way to get through on the phone. She continued to go about her business, and it was only towards evening that Chelsea's sister, Cassandra, texted her. She informed her that Chelsea still hadn't returned home. Becky replied that Chelsea had planned to spend the night at Laura's. Everyone calmed down, thinking that Chelsea was at her place, but Chelsea didn't come home by Monday, which looked suspicious. The family contacted Laura, but she hadn't heard from Chelsea since the party. They started calling everyone they knew from the event, and it turned out that Chelsea hadn't spent the night at any of her friends' houses, and no one had seen her since the night they lost each other at the party. Chelsea had not been in touch with any of her friends and acquaintances, nor had she appeared on social media. Therefore, the missing person's loved ones found themselves in a panic. They contacted the Monroe County Police Department and reported the young woman missing. A report was taken from the missing person's family. At first, the police were reluctant to take the case because it was all about the party, alcohol, and an adult 22-year-old girl who, by law, could do anything, including leaving without informing her loved ones. But relatives insisted on looking for Chelsea. Her mother was sure something bad had happened to her. Detectives began to investigate the circumstances of the disappearance of the young girl. They set up a search circle in the area between Newport and her farmhouse. While the search for the missing girl was underway, the detectives sought the help of Mike, a rock singer and party organizer, and called him in for questioning. The guy came to the police station to give a statement. However, he was not intimately acquainted with Chelsea and claimed he had no idea where she was. Mike did not arouse any suspicion, so they let him go home. Detectives met with security guards who were working the event. They claimed that they had not noticed anything suspicious. However, the girl's relatives thought that Mike knew more than he was saying, so they came straight to his house, trying to find out any information about their daughter. They unceremoniously invaded his territory, as this is where the party was held, and began to conduct their own searches. The situation at that point became extremely heated. Mike agreed to allow law enforcement officers onto his property. He did not refuse anyone, as he did not want to be considered involved in the disappearance of the girl. But on the territory, the police found nothing of interest to the investigation. Despite an organized search operation, nothing could be found. On Monday, the next day, detectives continued to contact people who had been at the Halloween party. Of course, it was difficult to get any information. It was a costume party where everyone wore masks and costumes and drank. At the same time, these were young people who didn't mind making themselves known. As a result of communication with the guests of the party, detectives received hundreds of contradictory facts, many of which they could not even check. This took a lot of time. Most of the data provided turned out to be false. Most likely, young people were simply confused and gave incorrect information, but there were also people who were deliberately trying to draw attention to themselves. Among the testimonies provided were even frankly absurd ones. According to one of the holidaymakers at the party, the girl could have been kidnapped into slavery. Another person said that a satanic ritual was held there and she could have been burned alive. Either way, the case went viral. Information about it, rumors and lies spread among the locals at the speed of wildfire. The news was littered with the most gruesome headlines, including suggestions of victims of satanic rituals. All of this hurt the family of the missing woman, as well as Mike, who for some time had been considered the prime suspect because of his fame. Despite the seeming absurdity, the police were forced to test all the theories voiced by the guests. They found out that there was indeed a bonfire to the side of the stage which reached a height of 2 meters. The ashes from it were sifted, and it turned out that there were no human remains in it. Therefore, the theory of ritual sacrifice was ruled out. Mike's farm was thoroughly searched on quad bikes and with dogs, which took several days. Many volunteers were involved, but nothing suspicious was found. The missing woman's friends felt guilty about what had happened. After all, they were the ones who left her alone that night and didn't look for her. They all actively monitored the missing woman's social media pages, trying to find any clues as to where Chelsea might be. Chelsea did not have a steady boyfriend, so police officers found and questioned all the young men with whom the missing woman had been in some way connected in recent years. Their cars were searched, and DNA samples of the boyfriends were collected. During this period, rock singer Mike allowed a real command center for the search operation to be set up on his farm and assisted the police in every way possible. He even provided a generator so that the search team would have uninterrupted access to electricity. Volunteers and those who cared about Chelsea's fate, including her family and friends, also set up a tent camp here. The search for the girl was going on almost around the clock, but there was no progress. Despite the warm welcome and comprehensive assistance to the investigation, which Mike provided, he still aroused suspicion among the detectives. First of all, because of the fact that the guy was very reluctant to communicate with them and seemed to be hiding something. But even that was understandable, considering how unceremoniously they had invaded his territory. Eventually, all the guy's possessions were searched, but nothing against Mike was found. The very arrival of the police was a very unpleasant episode, as they rounded him up and threw him to the ground, even threatening to shoot his dog, which was trying to protect its owner. But there was a reason for that too. For when the police arrived, they found Mike covered in blood. It was later determined that he had soiled himself while rescuing his dog, which he had carried from the woods in his arms after it had been caught in a trap and badly injured. In the end, Mike had only himself to blame for throwing the party and not properly ensuring the safety of those gathered at the event. However, for this, he felt attacked by the missing woman's family, neighbors, and police officers. People came to his fields completely without permission. One woman went there with her dog at around 3 a.m. and searched the entire yard around the house to find Chelsea there, but all to no avail. There were a lot of people here. Helicopters were flying. Drones were peering into the guy's windows literally day and night. All of this was causing serious stress, especially against a background of police suspicion and media activity. In the course of the investigation, detectives came upon Gavin Hewitt, who gave investigators new information. According to him, the girl in the poison ivy costume was also looking for her friends at the event after she went missing from sight. She asked party guests about Laura, but no one wanted to help. She burst into tears. Then one of the guys in the crowd, named Gavin, took pity on her and offered his mobile phone around 1 a.m., but she could only get through to Penny. Chelsea asked her to pick her up from the party, but she replied that she was already home and had gone to bed. She was drunk, so she couldn't come get her friend. According to Gavin, Chelsea was very upset that she lost her friends and was left all alone. However, the girl refused his offer to give her a ride. According to other witnesses from the party, Chelsea made it to the car park. She felt helpless as all her belongings were left in the car, including her phone. She couldn't get to them, couldn't call anyone, and couldn't find her friends. Some acquaintances saw her there, but unfortunately, no one ever helped the girl. Eventually, around 2:45 a.m., Chelsea walked out onto a gravel road that ran from the car park. She tried to find someone she knew who could give her a lift home. Several people offered to help her get home, but she declined the stranger's help and headed alone on foot towards home. There, the girl was last seen alive. Many mobile phone camera recordings were made at the party. The police collected all possible materials from the party participants. Now they had to analyze thousands of photos and videos. Some witnesses talked about a guy who was selling t-shirts that night. The cops were looking for him not as a suspect, but as a witness who might have spotted Chelsea. When the officers found the t-shirt vendor, he admitted that he had indeed seen the girl in the poison ivy costume. She looked so bright that it was hard to miss her. The witness was also able to give police officers some clues. According to him, the girl was approached by some suspicious-looking guy wearing a hoodie and a sweatshirt. They chatted, and then the girl left with him around 3 a.m. They just chatted and looked like regular mates. No hugging or flirting. It turns out this stranger was caught on several cameras that filmed what was going on. Based on these recordings, as well as the testimony of the t-shirt seller, with the help of a forensic artist, a portrait of the man who may have been the last person to see Chelsea Bruck alive was drawn up. This portrait was shown to the media, and at the same time, a reward was announced for any information that would solve the case. Gradually, the reward fund grew from $5,000 to $30,000. Flyers were actively distributed. The whole of Monroe County was filled with photos of the missing person. At that time, about 200,000 leaflets had already been distributed. Literally, all settlements were covered with posters with her photo, and leaflets were distributed by couriers with pizza. The police station started receiving calls with information from local residents. Many leads were received. Data was processed, and about 1,000 interrogations were conducted, but it never led to anything. After almost half a year, the case took an unexpected turn on New Year's Eve, 2015. The police received a call from a woman named Carrie Carr. She stated that her boyfriend told her that he killed Chelsea. The woman was dating her boyfriend as suddenly in anger, he said he killed a girl in a poison ivy costume with the same knife he threatened her with. Carrie revealed that she ran away from her boyfriend because he was going to stalk her and the baby. She was aware of the high-profile case involving Chelsea's disappearance and so wanted to help with the investigation. The police were skeptical about this information because the woman had a clear motive to provoke the arrest of the boyfriend. She could simply take revenge on him in this way. Such cases had already been in the practice of investigators, but they could not ignore it, so they undertook to verify the information. As the details were established, it turned out that this was another false claim. It turned out that the caller, Carrie, was one of 2 people arrested by the police for perjury. She really did go to such desperate measures to get back at her ex. The second detainee was Harlan Burt, a 19-year-old who claimed to have intervened in the conflict. According to him, Chelsea was being harassed by 2 guys, and he tried to fight them off, but they dragged the girl into the fields. However, he later admitted that the whole thing was a fabrication. Although this information did not help in any way to advance the case, the police soon received a new call. On the 22nd of March, 2015, Cheryl Redley was cleaning her patio of her home after the winter. She found a red leather shoe that she simply tossed into a rubbish bag without thinking. Her spouse came in the evening and saw the shoe in the bag. He asked his wife about it, and she admitted that she had found it while cleaning up the yard. He then speculated that the find might be related to the disappearance of Chelsea, who was just wearing red shoes. The house was about a mile from where the party was. Police officers had repeatedly scoured the area, but the couple could not believe that the searchers could have missed a conspicuous red shoe. Puzzled by these questions, the woman called the police and reported the find. Officers who arrived on the scene inspected the area and the shoe. They took the shoe and confirmed that it was very similar to the shoes of the missing Chelsea. However, nothing else could be found here. It turned out that indeed this area had not been inspected before. The searchers did not have time to do it before the onset of winter, and then the snow hid all possible clues. A new discovery was made soon after. Eric K-Sapp was collecting scrap metal with friends at an abandoned industrial plant 15 miles from the party site. While crossing the railway tracks, he accidentally knocked over rotting plywood. He thought there was some strange plant underneath. When he touched it, he realized it was a carnival costume. Next to it lay a red wig, just like the one Chelsea had worn the night she disappeared. However, the man did not immediately go to the police. He was aware of the girl's disappearance but did not pay attention to her clothes. A week later, Eric saw another report on TV about the search for the missing woman in this costume and realized that his find was much more important than he had originally thought. Perhaps it really was connected to the girl's disappearance. However, he did not immediately report it to the police, even afterward, as he was afraid that his DNA could have been left on the outfit when he examined it. The man was afraid of police charges, but his conscience plagued him. He confessed to his sister that he had found the costume, and she made him report the find to the police. A week later, Eric reported the find to the sheriff's department. The police arrived at the specified location and found Chelsea's carnival costume and wig. Naturally, Eric became the prime suspect. The man provided the cops with all the information they needed, including his DNA samples. He was adamant that he never knew Chelsea. Investigators pressed him to the end, but he denied everything. Eric agreed to take a polygraph test and successfully passed. By then, forensics had already examined the missing woman's outfit. They noticed that the straps had been torn off as if it had been taken off the girl by force, and the leggings were torn. However, they had to wait for the results of the forensic examination. On the poison ivy suit, brown stains that looked like blood were found. Forensics confirmed that it was blood, and it belonged to the missing Chelsea. After that, everyone was even more desperate to find the girl alive. By then, over 1 million flyers had been distributed, but there was still no significant progress in the case. Then, the police realized that Chelsea's costume had been found near the trailer of Harlan's grandmother, who had earlier testified that he had tried to wrestle Chelsea away from strangers, but they had dragged her into the woods. He later admitted that the story was a fabrication. Police believed the coincidences were not coincidental and invited him in for questioning. Harlan claimed he was not involved in the girl's disappearance, but could not explain why his name had already come up twice in the case. He was asked to take a polygraph test, and he agreed. Harlan passed it successfully and submitted his DNA samples. His material wasn't found on the missing woman's clothes or shoes. Therefore, all suspicions against him were lifted. On the 24th of April 2015, John Marin, who was preparing his 5-hectare plot of land covered with dense forest for construction, discovered something. The site was not far from the abandoned building where Chelsea's clothes were found, and about 10 miles from the rock concert venue. Construction workers were working on the site when a bulldozer got stuck in the mud in a tight spot. When the driver got out to look, he saw what looked like a human skeleton. He called out to the other workers, who took a closer look and were convinced that it was a human body. The body was badly decomposed, and there was no face. Construction work was halted, and the terrified workers called the police. A man informed the dispatcher that he had found human remains. John suspected it was the body of the missing Chelsea, who everyone was actively searching for. One of the scraps from her costume was found nearby. Her hair was blonde. All of this reinforced his suspicions. Police arrived at the spot and found the body, which was dumped in the open and covered with branches and leaves. The remains were sent for forensic examination. The body was identified thanks to dental records. It was indeed the missing Chelsea Bruck. The medical examiner determined that Chelsea died a horrible and agonizing death. The murder was very brutal. The girl's jaw was so mutilated that it literally split in two. The facial bones in the area of the eyes and nose were shattered, and several teeth were knocked out. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Evidence was found that she had been raped before her death. The perpetrator's DNA was found on the body and uploaded to the police database, but no match was found. Due to the poor condition of the body, no further information could be obtained, and the investigation was stalled for some time. More than a year later, an important clue emerged in 2016. DNA matching the DNA found at the crime scene suddenly appeared in the police database. It was Daniel Clay, a 27-year-old man who grew up in Monroe County. He got into the database because of child support problems. The guy had a rough childhood. His mother went to prison right after giving birth, so he was raised by foster parents. When Daniel was 17 years old, his foster father died, and the teenager was placed in an orphanage. There, he became addicted to illegal substances. Afterward, he had no steady job. One of his old girlfriends got pregnant, but he refused to have the child and didn't pay child support. He had a turbulent criminal record, including intimate harassment and dealing in illegal substances. But for some reason, his DNA samples had not previously been taken for the police database. On the 22nd of July, 2016, Daniel was arrested again and brought in for questioning. He admitted he was at that party, but quickly left. However, the guy refused to admit he had anything to do with Chelsea and even claimed he was seeing her for the first time. At the same time, he could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of the murdered woman. Under pressure from the police, he admitted that he had forgotten that he had a consensual, casual intimacy with some unknown girl at the party. According to him, she was wearing some kind of costume, and he didn't get a good look at her. According to the guy, he got into a car with her, and a short time after the intimacy, they broke up. The suspect's mistake was that he thought it was about male fluids. However, the police found not fluids on Chelsea's body and on the straps of her poison ivy costume, but his skin cells. They also found traces of him on her torn leggings, which were ripped along the seam between her legs. It didn't look like a consensual act, and the police didn't tell him that the victim had intimate contact with someone. Only a narrow circle of investigators knew about this, so when Daniel said that he had had sexual intercourse, he admitted it himself. Since then, the suspect has repeatedly changed his testimony, including a complete denial that he knew Chelsea and that he did not have intercourse with anyone that night. Once again, during questioning, the perpetrator's story changed. This time, Daniel said that he did have intercourse that night with a girl he met leaving the car park. She herself got into his car and started flirting with him. Daniel became more assertive. She accepted his advances, but then became aggressive. In a fit of passion, she demanded that he bite her, hit her, and strangle her during lovemaking. He had to comply. The boyfriend bit and choked her for several seconds at a time. The suspect reported that when the sexual intercourse was over, he realized that the girl was not showing signs of life. He tried to resuscitate her, to bring her to her senses, but nothing worked. She had no pulse. In a state of shock and panic, Daniel didn't know what to do. He just drove around the forest roads for about half an hour, trying to gather his thoughts, then dumped the body in the woods near an abandoned industrial building. He was never able to explain why Chelsea's clothes were found so far away from the body. Overall, his story seemed absurd and implausible, so investigators did not believe in its veracity. This ball of lies from the main suspect grew endlessly. As a result, the police lost patience and charged Daniel Clay with the murder of Chelsea Bruck. Daniel pleaded not guilty. He claimed that the girl died as a result of an accident during passion. In May 2017, the trial of Daniel Clay began. He tried to prove to everyone present in court that he strangled the girl too much during sexual intercourse and she died accidentally. However, the medical examiner refuted his story, affirming that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, which meant that Daniel's whole story was a lie. Daniel's girlfriend testified at the trial, saying that she had never noticed him being violent and could not believe that he was capable of such a thing. But at the next court hearing, Daniel's girlfriend was shocked and testified. She said that he confessed to her of the crime when she visited him in prison. The police put forward their version that the accused saw Chelsea walking down the road alone and was defenseless that night. He tricked her into getting into the car, then raped and brutally beat her to death. Daniel could not explain why the girl's costume and wig were found in one place, one shoe in another, and her body in a third place. This story left so many gaps that were unexplained, but the important thing was that the girl's body was found and the perpetrator was caught. To refute false testimony, a special dummy was even used, which the defendant strangled for a few seconds right in front of the jury. It was proven that his words were untrue because it was necessary to squeeze the neck for about 3 minutes to strangle someone. The prosecutor personally demonstrated how long it takes to squeeze the neck to kill a person, and it made a strong impression on the jury. Also, the prosecutor further emphasized the mutilation that the perpetrator inflicted on the victim. There were multiple fractures to the face and jaw. The perpetrator acted with extreme brutality in inflicting these injuries on the victim. It became clear that such a crime could not have been random. As a result, the court found Daniel Clay guilty of rape, brutal murder, and bodily harm. The court sentenced Daniel Clay to life in prison without parole. The court also sentenced him to another 75 years in prison on other charges of violence against women. Sometime later, Chelsea's mother gave him a Bible, which Daniel Clay promised to keep. Incredibly, Chelsea's mother admitted in a media interview that she forgave her daughter's killer. Perhaps it was said out of emotion. A chilling story unfolded in a quiet suburban area. There were threats, warnings, strange behavior, and moments of anxious tension. The crime was so brutal and calculated that it shocked even the most experienced investigators. The case was so complex that it hit a dead end several times. The terrible consequences of this tragedy will leave indelible marks. Marriage is a union that carries profound consequences not only for the couple, but also for their families and communities. When people get married, what starts as a promising journey can easily devolve into a tragic scenario worthy of crime headlines. On the fateful morning of November 27, 2017, the sheriff's office in Coffee County, Alabama, received a deeply unsettling report. A witness had come forward with information about what appeared to be a suicide. Police were dispatched to a residence owned by a local church, a house that had long been used by the community, but was now being rented out to congregation members. Living there was Sarah Starr, a recently divorced mother of 4 young children. Sarah Starr was born in 1979 in the small, humble town of Colby, Kansas. From a very young age, Sarah exhibited a natural affinity for understanding people, especially children. Her ability to connect with them led her to pursue a career in education, specifically teaching literature and writing at a local elementary school. After completing her degree at the University of Kansas, Sarah embarked on her teaching career. Her passion for literature was evident to her students, and those who interacted with her were quick to notice her empathy and gentle nature. People who knew her described her as not only a caring teacher, but also a person whose calm demeanor brought out the best in others, be it in the classroom or in more personal settings. Her life seemed poised for contentment, but as we will see, circumstances can shift dramatically. Sarah had married Jason in February 2001, when she was 22, and Jason was 28. At the time, Sarah had just finished her studies and had obtained her degree in education. Jason, a military veteran, had recently returned to civilian life and was trying to find his footing in the working world. His courtship was short-lived. Sarah, enchanted by Jason's strength and charm, thought she had found a partner for life. Jason, on the other hand, had already been through one failed marriage, from which he had a son. Despite his past, Sarah was determined to make their marriage work, confident that love could overcome any challenges they might face. For a few years, things seemed relatively stable. Jason found work, and Sarah supported him emotionally, focusing on building a home and family. Yet as time went on, cracks began to show in their relationship, cracks that would only deepen with the arrival of their children. 4 years into their marriage, Sarah and Jason welcomed twins. While Sarah was overjoyed, Jason's reaction was more muted. He struggled with the responsibilities of fatherhood, and as the couple's financial pressures mounted, his patience wore thin. A second set of twins was born 5 years later, adding even more strain to an already struggling household. For Sarah, however, becoming a mother of 4 was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. She adored her children and threw herself wholeheartedly into motherhood. Jason, on the other hand, became more distant and irritable. Their marriage was deteriorating, but Sarah, ever the optimist, tried to hold things together for the sake of her children. They relocated to Coffee County, Alabama, in hopes that a change of scenery might improve their fortunes. Jason started a new job and even ventured into starting his own business, while Sarah took on the role of a full-time housewife, managing the household and caring for 4 young children. Despite her love for her family, Sarah found the responsibilities overwhelming. The demands of raising 4 children, maintaining the home, and trying to manage a part-time job left her physically and emotionally drained. Jason's new business was not doing as well as they had hoped, and his mood swings became more volatile. Publicly, he was dismissive and often cruel, belittling Sarah in front of others. In private, the emotional abuse worsened. Sarah's friends began to notice the toll this was taking on her, though she tried to downplay her struggles, insisting that things would get better. But it was becoming increasingly clear that their marriage was not what it appeared to be. In time, Sarah found solace in the local Baptist church, quickly becoming an integral part of the congregation. Her kind-heartedness, sociability, and infectious sense of humor made her a beloved member of the congregation. She also had hobbies such as gardening and photography, which brought her moments of peace amidst the turbulence of her personal life. By 2016, Sarah was teaching 4th grade at a local elementary school, where her colleagues spoke highly of her. They described her as upbeat and cheerful, a positive presence in the school. Despite her outward cheer, Sarah's home life remained a constant source of stress and sorrow. Jason often berated Sarah for the chaos that naturally comes with raising 4 young children. The noise, the mess, and the demands of parenthood seemed to wear on him, particularly after the birth of their second set of twins. The family had grown larger, but instead of viewing the children as blessings, Jason began to resent them, seeing them as a heavy burden rather than an extension of their love. This shift in his attitude worsened the already toxic environment in their home. Sarah realized that the relationship was no longer sustainable, but like many trapped in unhealthy marriages, she felt there was no way out. Financially, she had been dependent on Jason for years, and with 4 children to support, the idea of leaving seemed daunting. However, as soon as she secured her teaching position, Sarah saw a glimmer of hope for financial independence. The strength to leave Jason grew in her, and she began to envision a life without his constant emotional abuse. Even though she knew the road ahead would be difficult, what with dividing their property, sharing custody of the children, and untangling their financial ties, Sarah felt that the time had come to escape. She moved out of their home, renting a small house provided by the church, and filed for divorce. What followed was a grueling 2-year legal battle that took a toll on her mental health and emotional well-being. During the divorce process, Jason was relentless in his criticisms of Sarah. According to him, she was constantly under stress, and one of his chief complaints was her so-called frivolous spending. He accused Sarah of being a shopaholic, spending his hard-earned money on unnecessary items. Sarah did indeed face financial difficulties after separating from Jason, but this was largely because she had been left to support her children with minimal resources. Thankfully, the church community rallied around her during these tough times, offering her emotional and financial support. Despite everything, Sarah remained a loving and attentive mother. Her dedication to her children never wavered, and she managed to juggle her parental responsibilities while maintaining her job as a teacher. Still, the pressures of life weighed heavily on Sarah. Her mental health was deteriorating, and she found herself more and more anxious. She often quarreled with Jason during their encounters, struggled with insomnia, and showed signs of mild depression. Yet despite her fragile state, she refused to seek professional help, preferring to rely on antidepressants rather than engaging with a therapist. Her decision to avoid therapy reflected her deep-seated fear of vulnerability, perhaps a lasting effect of the emotional abuse she had endured during her marriage. When it finally came time to move out of the house she had shared with Jason, Sarah enlisted the help of her close friends Dana and Lawrence. They noticed that she was unusually nervous throughout the process. Sarah seemed frantic, rushing to pack her belongings, often forgetting things and having to return to the house multiple times. It was clear to Dana and Lawrence that something was deeply unsettling her. The most alarming part of the day was Sarah's constant fear that Jason might show up unannounced. She expressed a genuine terror of seeing him again, as if she expected some kind of confrontation. As it turned out, Jason did arrive, though not at the house they were vacating, but at Sarah's new place. When he appeared, Sarah bolted inside, clearly shaken by his presence. Lawrence, acting as a protective barrier, met Jason at the doorstep and asked him to leave. To their relief, Jason complied, though he lingered for a while before finally departing. Inside, Sarah was trembling, on the verge of a breakdown. She confided in Dana and Lawrence that she was convinced Jason had come to harm her. His previous threats to hurt her if she ever left him echoed in her mind, and this fear had been consuming her since the separation. Even after Jason had gone, Sarah remained on edge, her hands shaking, her voice unsteady. It took hours for her to calm down. This unsettling encounter occurred early in the separation, but the fear it instilled in Sarah lingered for years. Finally, after 2 agonizing years, the divorce was settled. According to the terms of the agreement, the custody of the children was divided between Sarah and Jason, with each parent responsible for 2 of the twins. Jason was also required to pay Sarah $3,500 a month in child support and spousal maintenance. This amount, while vital to Sarah's ability to care for her children, significantly impacted Jason's finances, as it represented more than half of his monthly income. Despite this, Sarah did not gain any rights to Jason's business or other assets. She continued to live in the modest house provided by the church, while Jason relocated to a nearby home, moving in with his elderly mother. Living just a short distance from Jason added to Sarah's ongoing anxiety. Even though the divorce was finalized, she never felt fully free of him. His presence, both physical and emotional, loomed large in her life. Every interaction they had, whether about the children, finances, or logistical arrangements, rekindled the fear and tension that had defined their marriage. For Sarah, the divorce had ended the legal ties between them, but the emotional wounds remained wide open. Despite the court's ruling, the shadow of Jason's anger and control continued to darken her new life, leaving her to wonder whether she would ever truly be free of him. On the morning of November 27, 2017, something tragic and unexpected unfolded that would change the lives of many people. Sarah Starr, a beloved teacher and devoted mother of 4, was supposed to return to work following the Thanksgiving holiday. Her colleagues, accustomed to her punctuality and dependability, became increasingly concerned when she didn't show up to her classroom. Attempts to reach her by phone went unanswered, and her absence was met with growing anxiety. It was completely out of character for Sarah to disappear without notifying anyone, particularly when it came to her responsibilities at the school. As the minutes ticked by, the staff's unease grew, and one of her colleagues, fearing something was terribly wrong, decided to check on her personally. Their worst fears were confirmed. Around 8:30 a.m., Sarah was found lying in a pool of blood in the driveway outside her home. The sight was horrifying and made their blood run cold. Emergency services were immediately called to the scene, but it was clear that her injuries were catastrophic. At first, some thought Sarah might have taken her own life, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of single motherhood and the trauma of her recent divorce. However, even a brief examination by the authorities indicated otherwise. It was clear that this was not a suicide. Sarah had been brutally attacked. The forensic examination revealed that Sarah had left her house at around 6:30 a.m., presumably on her way to work. But before she could even reach her car, she was gunned down. The assailant had used a shotgun, firing from nearly point-blank range. One shot struck her in the chest, while a second, devastating blast hit her in the head. The attack was vicious, cold-blooded, and clearly premeditated. Despite the severity of the crime, there were few immediate clues. The rural setting of Sarah's home meant that neighbors, though hearing gunshots, hadn't thought much of it. In such areas, it wasn't uncommon to hear gunfire, as people frequently used weapons for hunting or to scare off wildlife. As a result, the gunshots that killed Sarah were dismissed as part of the rural soundscape. There were no fingerprints, no tire tracks, and no witnesses who had seen the killer. The only thing investigators had to go on was Sarah's recent bitter divorce from her ex-husband, Jason Starr. Given the circumstances, Jason quickly became the prime suspect. Jason and Sarah's marriage had been troubled, with years of emotional abuse culminating in their divorce, which had only been finalized a few months before Sarah's death. Sarah had confided in close friends, including Dana and Lawrence, who had helped her move out of the house she shared with Jason. They confirmed to police that Sarah had been living in fear of her ex-husband, especially after the divorce settlement required Jason to pay substantial alimony and child support. Sarah had often expressed her belief that Jason might seek revenge, fearing that he would lash out due to the financial strain the divorce put on him. The proximity of Jason's new residence, just a few minutes' walk from Sarah's rented church house, only heightened suspicions. It seemed almost too coincidental that Sarah had been killed shortly after a contentious divorce, and with Jason living so close by, it was natural for investigators to consider him the most likely culprit. He was quickly brought in for questioning. Jason, however, denied any involvement in Sarah's murder. He told investigators that on the morning of the shooting, he had been at a local restaurant, eating breakfast with his children. To the disappointment of law enforcement, Jason's alibi was corroborated by security footage and witness testimony. After hours of interrogation, he was released, though detectives remained unconvinced of his innocence. Even if he hadn't pulled the trigger himself, they speculated that Jason might have orchestrated the attack. Perhaps he had hired someone to kill Sarah, motivated by the financial burden of the divorce and his ongoing resentment towards his ex-wife. These suspicions lingered, but without concrete evidence, the investigation hit a wall. Jason's release did little to quell the growing tension surrounding the case. Although his alibi seemed solid, those closest to Sarah remained convinced that he was somehow involved. After all, Sarah had no known enemies, no connections to the criminal underworld, and no history of dangerous associations. Her murder seemed personal, and the most obvious motive belonged to Jason. Yet proving his involvement was another matter entirely. Over the following months, the investigation dragged on with few developments. The local police, lacking significant leads, continued to keep a close watch on Jason, hoping that something would slip through the cracks. By January 2018, despite their efforts, no new evidence emerged. In an attempt to reignite public interest in the case, a press conference was held. The state governor announced a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of Sarah's killer. An additional $500 was later contributed by a concerned townsperson. Unfortunately, these efforts did not yield results. A handful of tips came in, but each one was investigated and ultimately dismissed as irrelevant. With the investigation stalled, Sarah's children were placed into the custody of social services. This decision was made due to lingering concerns about Jason's integrity and whether it was safe for the children to remain in his care. As a result, Jason's relationship with his children became increasingly strained, further complicating his life in the wake of the tragedy. As months turned into years, the case grew colder. Despite occasional statements from law enforcement and renewed appeals for information, Sarah's murder remained unsolved. Local police were joined by state law enforcement agencies in their efforts to find justice for Sarah, but every lead they pursued eventually fizzled out. By that point, public interest had waned, and the community had started to lose hope that Sarah's killer would ever be brought to justice. Yet, for Sarah's family, friends, and the many people whose lives she had touched, the memory of that horrific morning in 2017 remained painfully fresh. The question that haunted them all was simple. Would Sarah ever find the justice she deserved, or would her tragic death remain a mystery forever? It wasn't easy for the detectives to establish a clear connection between Jason Starr and his ex-wife's murder, but they were increasingly convinced that he was involved. Although Jason had a solid alibi for the morning of Sarah's death, he had been having breakfast with his children at a local restaurant. This didn't entirely absolve him of suspicion. The investigators theorized that if Jason didn't commit the crime himself, he might have hired someone to do it. Financial pressure provided a strong motive. After the divorce, Jason was ordered to pay over half of his income, $3,500 out of a $6,300 monthly salary, in alimony and child support. This situation was an obvious source of resentment for him. Jason had tried and failed to gain full custody of his children in order to avoid these payments, which only intensified his frustrations. It wasn't until December 2021, 4 long years after Sarah's death, that the investigation saw any renewed attention. While investigating Jason's personal life, police examined his computer and discovered a mass of documents that shed new light on his state of mind. The files appeared to be part of a draft for a book Jason had been writing for years. In these writings, he vented his anger over the court's decision, bitterly resenting the financial obligations imposed on him. His notes were filled with degrading comments about Sarah and women in general. The tone was aggressive and demeaning, and while there was no explicit mention of a plan to kill Sarah, his contempt for her was evident. The more detectives read, the clearer it became that Jason harbored a deep, festering hatred for his ex-wife. These writings only bolstered the investigators' suspicions. The investigation took a significant turn when detectives began scrutinizing Jason's financial transactions. They discovered a series of 7 payments totaling $2,600, all made between September 7th and November 15th, 2017. These transactions were sent to a woman named Lily, a person Jason had no known prior relationship with. The investigation revealed that Lily was a friend of Jason's brother, Darren. Curiously, before September 7th, there had been no contact or financial exchanges between Jason and Lily. This sudden flurry of payments raised red flags, leading the detectives to dig deeper into this connection. When the police interviewed Lily, they uncovered another peculiar detail. Jason had given his brother Darren a 2016 model motorcycle, an expensive gift that seemed out of place considering Jason's tight financial situation. When questioned about this, Jason claimed that the motorcycle had been damaged in an accident and that he hadn't wanted to go through the insurance process. Instead, he said, he gave the bike to Darren to repair. According to Jason, Darren had estimated the repairs would cost $5,000, and the $2,600 in payments was supposed to help cover the cost of the parts. However, the fact that Jason sent this money through Lily rather than directly to Darren seemed odd. Jason offered no explanation for why he chose to involve a woman he barely knew in this financial arrangement. The detectives weren't buying Jason's story. The use of Lily as an intermediary looked suspicious, as though Jason were trying to conceal the true nature of these transactions. While Jason maintained that the money was meant to help repair the motorcycle, the police believed it was more likely that these payments were part of a scheme to fund Sarah's murder. Darren or Lily, or both, might have been involved in the killing, with Lily acting as a front to throw investigators off the trail. This theory was bolstered by the discovery that Darren had been in Alabama, near Sarah's home, in the days leading up to her death. Darren was not an easy man to track down. Described as a loner with a rough personality, he lived a largely isolated life in a trailer in Texas. He had a history of minor criminal activity, including a 2013 arrest for drug possession. When Darren had been pulled over for speeding that year, a police dog had alerted the officers to drugs in the vehicle. A subsequent search revealed various narcotics and equipment for their manufacture. Although Darren's drug charges resulted in a relatively lenient sentence, his criminal record painted a picture of a man with a penchant for crime. The detectives now faced a critical question. Was Darren capable of murder? They began to look more closely at his relationship with Jason, examining text messages, phone records, and other communications. As they pieced together Darren's movements in the days leading up to Sarah's murder, they found disturbing evidence. On November 18, 2017, just days before Sarah was killed, Darren had arrived in Coffee County, Alabama. He stayed in the area for 10 days, during which time he was frequently seen near the house Sarah rented from the church. The most damning piece of evidence came from cell phone records. Darren's phone had been turned off for several hours on the night before the murder, a common tactic used to avoid being tracked. When his phone was finally switched back on, it was around 10 a.m. the next day, and Darren was already back in Texas. This timing aligned perfectly with the murder, as Sarah had been shot early in the morning, between 6:30 and 7 a.m. The fact that Darren had been in the vicinity of Sarah's home and had turned off his phone suggested that he had something to hide. It seemed increasingly likely that Darren had carried out the murder, possibly at Jason's behest. Investigators began to zero in on Darren as the primary suspect, though they still couldn't rule out the possibility that Jason had orchestrated the entire plot. Jason's financial struggles, his bitter writings about Sarah, and the suspicious money transfers all pointed to his involvement in some capacity. Darren's sudden appearance in Alabama, coupled with his evasive behavior, made him a prime suspect in Sarah's killing. But proving that either of them was directly responsible for her death would require more evidence. As the case continued to unfold, It became clear that this was not just a story of a bitter divorce gone wrong. It was a tale of greed, anger, and revenge, with both Jason and Darren playing key roles in a conspiracy that led to the brutal murder of a mother of 4. The detectives were determined to get to the bottom of it, but they knew that proving Jason and Darren's guilt would be a long and arduous process. On the evening of November 27, the same day Sarah was murdered, Darren sent his brother Jason a cryptic message. It read like a coded communication, referencing the success of a deer hunt. To the detectives, it became clear that the brothers were communicating in code to conceal their involvement in Sarah's murder. A neighbor had even reported seeing a motorcycle near Sarah's house multiple times in the days leading up to the crime. The description of the motorcycle matched one Darren owned, and others in the neighborhood had also noticed this vehicle, but no one thought much of it at the time. The final piece of evidence came from a surveillance camera attached to a barn near Sarah's house. Just minutes after the crime, the camera caught a glimpse of the same motorcycle speeding away from the scene. Based on this mounting evidence, the detectives concluded that Jason had hired his brother to kill Sarah. On December 1, 2021, both Jason and Darren were formally charged with the murder. Jason, when arrested, behaved arrogantly, demanding a lawyer and dismissing the charges with an air of confidence. He repeatedly denied any involvement, stating that the police had no case against him. Jason was later released on bail pending trial, with an ankle bracelet placed on his body to track his movements. His trial was scheduled for June 27, 2022. Darren's situation was far more complicated. Unlike his brother, Darren fled, and the FBI took charge of the manhunt. Darren was added to the federal wanted list, with his photo circulated nationwide. Authorities offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to his capture, which was later raised to $225,000, showing the seriousness of the case. After a 2-month-long manhunt, Darren finally surrendered to authorities in Texas on February 5, 2022. He maintained his innocence and refused to be placed under house arrest, opting instead to stay in prison while awaiting trial. Throughout this period, Darren and Jason continued communicating via phone, though their conversations were carefully monitored by law enforcement. Despite the wiretaps, neither brother said anything particularly incriminating. The lack of direct evidence against Darren led to delays in the case, as the prosecution struggled to build a solid case against him. Darren's defense team capitalized on this, arguing that the case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence. During the pretrial phase, Darren's lawyer repeatedly attempted to shift suspicion away from the brothers by proposing alternative suspects. However, each of these leads was quickly debunked by the police, who found no evidence linking these individuals to the crime. Eventually, the court barred any further mention of these supposed suspects, citing a state law that prohibited the implication of third parties in a crime without strong evidence. By September 11, 2023, nearly 6 years after Sarah's murder, the trials for both Jason and Darren finally began. The prolonged delays had frustrated the community, which had been following the case closely. The prosecution's case rested heavily on Jason's financial motives. The state presented evidence that Jason had been struggling to meet the court-ordered alimony and child support payments, which amounted to more than half his monthly income. His resentment over these financial obligations, coupled with his animosity toward Sarah, created a compelling motive. The prosecution argued that Jason's bitterness toward his ex-wife had driven him to conspire with his brother Darren to eliminate her. They laid out the chain of events: Jason's transfer of money to Darren, his coded messages, and the suspicious use of Lily, a distant acquaintance, to funnel funds. They also noted that Darren had been in Alabama at the time of the murder and was seen near Sarah's home, tying him to the crime scene. The prosecutor's case was bolstered by the peculiar behavior of both Jason and Darren. Jason had sent money to Darren through Lily, despite having no ongoing relationship with her, and neither brother had communicated with her before or after the crime. This led prosecutors to argue that the brothers had used Lily as a conduit to hide their financial transactions. Though Lily was initially implicated as an accomplice, she was able to clear her name by insisting that she had no knowledge of the crime. She claimed she had simply facilitated the financial transfers without understanding their true purpose. Her shock at being considered a potential accomplice led the prosecutors to drop any charges against her. The defense, on the other hand, tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case. They argued that the police had rushed to judgment and had no solid evidence linking the brothers to Sarah's death. The defense team highlighted the absence of direct proof. The murder weapon was never found, there were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and the surveillance footage only showed a motorcycle driving away from the scene. It didn't capture the murder itself. Furthermore, Jason's bitter writings about Sarah, which the prosecution used as evidence of his intent, were framed by the defense as nothing more than emotional outbursts from a man struggling with the financial strain of a divorce. The defense argued that Jason's anger and frustration were not proof of a criminal conspiracy, but rather the natural reaction of someone overwhelmed by financial stress and personal loss. Moreover, the defense made a compelling case regarding the lack of forensic evidence. No DNA or physical evidence linked Darren directly to the scene of the crime. While Darren's presence in Alabama during the time of the murder was suspicious, the defense pointed out that there was no clear evidence proving he had actually committed the murder. Darren's lawyer painted him as a man with a troubled past, but far from a calculated killer. Yet the most significant argument from the defense was the challenge to the prosecution's timeline. The defense insisted that the authorities had made numerous procedural errors, including arresting Jason and Darren based on circumstantial evidence. They also highlighted that the motorcycle, which played a key role in the prosecution's case, was never found with any physical traces that connected it to the murder. Without more solid proof, the defense claimed, the entire case rested on conjecture. As the trial unfolded, the jury was left to grapple with these conflicting narratives. On one hand, there was the undeniable circumstantial evidence, Jason's financial despair, the cryptic messages between the brothers, and Darren's suspicious behavior leading up to the murder. On the other hand, the defense raised legitimate concerns about the lack of direct evidence, questioning whether the prosecution's case was built more on suspicion than facts. But there was one very interesting fact. During Darren's 10-day stay in Alabama, no recordings of telephone conversations between him and his brother Jason were found. This led investigators to believe that the two may have resorted to more discreet methods of communication, possibly face-to-face meetings or the use of disposable phones, which are often linked to illegal activities because of their untraceable nature. The defense lawyer pointed out that despite these suspicions, no solid forensic evidence was found at the crime scene to implicate the brothers. There were no footprints, fingerprints, DNA, or even tire tracks from the motorcycle. The absence of these crucial elements, according to the defense, was a strong argument that the prosecution's case lacked concrete proof. The lawyer also questioned the reliability of the surveillance footage. The video, captured by a camera on a barn near Sarah's house, was grainy and of poor quality. While it did show a motorcycle passing by a few minutes after the crime, it did not provide a clear enough image to conclusively identify the rider or the bike. The defense suggested that this footage could easily show someone else, pointing out that many people in the area owned motorcycles and frequently rode past that barn. Thus, the footage was far from definitive evidence. One of the defense's key arguments came from an alibi Jason provided. On the morning of Sarah's murder, Jason was seen having breakfast with his children at a restaurant about 10 miles from Sarah's home. This was around the time the crime occurred, which the defense argued made it highly unlikely that Jason could have been directly involved in the murder. Moreover, Jason had cooperated with the police from the outset, handing over his mobile phone and computer voluntarily. The lawyer stressed that a guilty person, especially one involved in planning a murder, would have been far more guarded and less willing to let the police examine such personal items. However, the prosecution countered these arguments by focusing on Jason's behavior following his arrest. And suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, he finally confessed to organizing the murder of his ex-wife. This confession, though, had complicated the defense's narrative. It was difficult for the jury to reconcile the image of a cooperative man with that of someone who later admitted to planning a brutal killing. After 6 days of heated court debates, the jury was tasked with deliberating the verdict. Their deliberations lasted 6 hours, and ultimately, on January 4, 2024, both brothers were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Jason, who had been under house arrest and required to wear an electronic bracelet, was taken into custody immediately after the sentencing.